Nevada is home to more than just deserts. It's home to strange creatures and bizarre interdimensional humanoids, like you're going to find out in today's episode. I'm bringing you 13 crazy, strange, and scary stories that you guys, well, you'll definitely not want to visit Nevada after this. So, without further ado, here we go. I've been meaning to write to you for a while now, but I guess I just never got around to it. But after what happened to me a few months back, I figure it's about time I shared my story. So, I was out on one of my usual road trips, just me and my old van, hitting the highway and seeing where the road took me. I found myself out in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in Nevada, I think. And I figured I'd find a quiet spot to park for the night and catch some shut-eye. Now, this wasn't the first time I'd been out in this part of the country. I've got some friends out on the reservation, and they've told me stories about strange things that happen out in the desert. They talk about these creatures, tall and skinny, with pale skin and big black eyes. They call them the Bone Men, and they say they've been around for centuries, watching and waiting. I never put much stock in those stories, figuring they were just old legends passed down through the generations. But that night, parked out there in the middle of nowhere, I started to wonder if maybe there was something to them after all. I pulled off onto this little dirt road way out in the desert and set up camp for the night. I was just about to drift off when I started hearing these noises outside the van. At first, I figured it was just the wind, or maybe some critter running around out there. But then it got louder, and I started to make out what sounded like voices. I sat up real slow, trying to peek out the window without being seen. And that's when I saw them. A whole group of figures, just standing there in the darkness. They were tall and skinny, with these long, spindly arms and legs, and their skin, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was pale and translucent, like you could almost see through it. I was frozen there, just watching them, when all of a sudden, one of them turned and looked right at me. Its eyes were huge and black, and it felt like they were staring right into my soul. It was like it knew I was there, like it could sense me somehow. I don't know how long I sat there, just staring back at this thing, but eventually, it turned away, and the whole group of them just vanished into the night. I didn't sleep a wink the rest of that night, just sat there clutching my flashlight and jumping at every little sound. The next day, I hightailed it out of there and went straight to the reservation to talk to my friends. I told them what I'd seen, and they just nodded like they'd heard it all before. They told me more stories about people who'd gone missing out in the desert, never to be seen again. They said the Bone Men took them, dragged them off to some underground lair or something. I didn't want to believe it, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to it all. And it wasn't just that one sighting either. Over the years, I've heard other stories from folks out in that part of the country. They talk about strange lights in the sky, about cattle mutilations and crop circles. Some even claim to have seen the Bone Men themselves, lurking around the edges of their property or peering in through their windows at night. I don't know what to make of it all. Part of me wants to just chalk it up to superstition and overactive imaginations. But another part of me can't shake the feeling that there's something out there, something we don't understand. And I can't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, those old native legends might be more than just stories after all. Anyway, that's my tale. Take it for what it's worth, but I figured you'd want to hear it straight from the source. Keep up the good work on the site, and if you ever find yourself out in this part of the country, keep your eyes open. You never know what might be watching from the shadows. I've always been a desert guy. There's a loneliness out there, a quiet that gets in your blood. I run a small gas station and convenience store along a dusty stretch of highway in Nevada. Not a lot happens, and that's how I like it. Until last week, that is. It was around 3 a.m., middle of July. So hot the asphalt shimmered even in the moonlight. Mostly, I deal with the odd trucker stopping through, maybe some lost tourists heading towards Death Valley. But that night, well, let's just say it wasn't a regular customer. I was behind the counter, half dozing, when something in the parking lot snagged my attention. Wasn't a regular car, no headlights. In fact, it didn't look like any vehicle I'd ever seen. Sort of a long, silvery pod hovering just above the ground. My heart thumped like a bass drum. There was this light, kinda hard to describe. It flickered all blue and weird across the concrete. Then came the thing. At first, I thought it was a person, a gangly guy all done up in a reflective suit. But as it got closer, it was way too tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more. The legs were long, bent backwards like a dog's, but way skinnier. The head, man, that was the creepiest part. Smooth, bald, and too big, with these giant black eyes that didn't even blink. I was frozen, couldn't even scream. This thing just drifted across the parking lot, right towards the store's front door. Before it got there, it looked straight at me, looking straight into my brain, and then poof, the thing, the pod, everything just vanished. I blinked at the empty parking lot, a knot forming in my gut. Now, I ain't one for crazy stories, and I don't drink on the job, so it wasn't that. I saw it with my own 2 eyes. Since then, I've been on edge. Every time a dust cloud kicks up in the distance, a shadow flitters at the edge of my vision. I think, it's back. I don't know what that thing was, why it was there, or if it'll ever come again. But there's one thing I know for sure. The Nevada desert doesn't feel so lonely anymore. Folks around here, they'll chuckle if I tell them this. Think I got too much sun, or maybe finally gone off the deep end. But I ain't touched a drop of booze, and my mind's as sharp as ever. Problem is, after seeing something like that, well, the world seems bigger and a lot less friendly. I used to take comfort in the quiet out here. Now, part of me's always listening for the hum of that pod thing, always watching the horizon line for that tall, freakish figure. Nights are the worst. Every shadow under the moon looks wrong somehow, stretched out. Maybe I'm just rattled. Maybe this whole thing will fade into some weird desert dream. But then I remember those eyes, and the way they seem to bore into my head. And I wonder, am I still alone out here? Do those things watch even when I can't see them? And most of all, what the hell did they want? I've lived next to the reservation my whole life. Sure, we hear the stories about witches and those other things that walk at night. Growing up, it felt like campfire tales meant to scare us kids. But last month, something happened that turned my stomach to ice. It was late, one of those muggy summer nights the crickets won't shut up about. I was out back on the porch, trying to snag a bit of a breeze. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 pinpricks of yellow light, just at the edge of the old cottonwood grove that borders the property. I figured it was a coyote at first, but the eyes were way too high and too close together. I flicked on my porch light just to get a better look. That's when it happened. From the tree line came the most messed up sound I've ever heard, like a woman sobbing mixed with a dry, raspy laugh. It raised the hair on my neck, and then those eyes just blinked out. I ran back inside, double-bolted the door. Next morning, my dad and I decided to check it out. Makes me feel foolish even typing this, but I figured some poor animal got caught on a fence. Under those cottonwoods, though, We didn't find any fur or blood. Only thing out of the ordinary was this weird print. Too big for a bird, but with only 3 clawed toes. Way too long and sharp to be any coyote track I know. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. That laugh, it sounded familiar. A few months back, my cousin from the res went missing. Hunting accident, they said. Her mom, well, everyone whispers she blamed something worse. The tribal elders don't like to talk about them, those skinwalker things. Just warn you not to be out after dark near the Badlands. To make offerings to keep yourself safe. That night, I felt like I was being watched, hunted even. Not by an animal, by something smart. Something that knew how to sound, almost human. I haven't been out at night since. Heard that laugh a few more times, echoing from way too close for comfort. My dad strung wards of sage and salt around the property. It helps a little. But now, I understand why the old stories always come with a warning. There's things out there that don't follow the same rules as us, and I reckon I've caught their attention. Thinking about those eyes under the cottonwoods always drags up something else from the back of my mind. Something that happened when I was just a kid, maybe 10 years old. Dad and I used to camp up in the high desert canyons a lot. One night, way up on a ridge, we got caught in a wicked summer thunderstorm. Dad always kept a tarp in the truck bed, so we huddled under that, trying to stay dry. During a break in the rain, I looked out across the canyon, and that's when I saw it. Way down near the stream bed, crouched by the water. At first, I thought it was a big dog, all gaunt and sickly looking. But it stood up on its hind legs, and it wasn't right. The limbs were too long, the way its head lolled on its neck. My dad saw it too, and I've never seen him scared like that before or since. He yelled at me to get my eyes shut, started praying over me. I peeked just for a second. That thing was staring right up at us, its jaw hanging loose and dripping. When the rain cleared, we booked it out of there. Didn't even look back. Dad never really talked about it after. Said it was probably a buzzard picked clean, playing tricks in the stormlight. But I know what I saw. After that night by the cottonwoods, it all comes rushing back. The way that thing felt when it looked at me, like it knew me, and not in a good way. I always got the chills when we passed that old canyon. Now, the whole desert, everything around the reservation, feels off limits, like it's filled with eyes I can't see. Honestly, I wasn't the spiritual type before all this. Went to church sometimes, more for family than anything else. But after seeing those things, you start thinking different. Maybe there's more out there than what we see, more forces at work that we just don't get. Lately, I've been delving into local legends, old Navajo and Hopi stories. There's a lot of talk about spirits that walk in animal shapes, trickster things, powerful but dangerous if you cross them. Makes me think twice about what the skinwalkers might actually be. Then, some nights, when I'm up staring at the ceiling, a different thought creeps in. All these old tribal stories overlap with the stuff you hear from UFO nuts. Talk about secret bases, the government hiding stuff out here in the desert. Makes me wonder if these creatures aren't just wilderness spirits, but something else entirely. It's a crazy connection to make, I get that. But have you ever seen what a drone can do these days? Flying around all silent, strange lights can even mimic some real animals pretty well. Maybe the old stories have some truth, just warped over time. Maybe both sides of it, the ancient spirits and the super advanced tech, are real, operating right under our noses. Don't know which idea scares me more. That I stumbled into some 1,000-year-old supernatural feud out here, or that there's people, or worse, with powers beyond anything we can imagine. Either way, I feel small suddenly. Whatever's playing out here in the desert, it's way bigger than me, and I'm damn sure not in control. Some mornings, I think I can make this all go away. Pack up the old truck, head to the coast, forget about the reservation, the cottonwoods, and those yellow eyes. But then I remember that laugh, see the wards of salt and sage my dad hung, and realize I'm not escaping this. I've tried talking to folks from the res, but they get this tight-lipped look. Tell me I shouldn't poke around where I don't belong. Maybe they know something. Maybe they don't. Feels like we're all living side by side with secrets, everyone tiptoeing around the same darkness. For now, I make sure the doors are locked at night. Keep a shotgun loaded by the bed, just in case. Don't know if it'll do any good against whatever's out there, but it makes me feel a little less powerless. Maybe one day, I'll get some answers, figure out if those things are spirits, aliens, or something else entirely. Or maybe they'll find me first. Hey everyone, my grandpa is full Navajo and I'm half, so I've been raised on stories about skinwalkers and Yinald-Lushi. Never thought I'd see something myself though. This happened last summer. My grandpa lives way out in the boonies near the Arizona border in Nevada. We were visiting him for a week, and one night, he's 17 but acts like 12, were dared by his older brother to go check out Skinwalker Canyon. It's this creepy place where a bunch of cows went missing a few years back. No tracks, nothing. Anyway, we're being dumb and head out there at night with just flashlights. It was dark as pitch, man. We didn't hear nothing but crickets for a while. Then Frankie tripped over something and screamed like a baby. We shined our lights and there it was, standing maybe 10 feet away. This thing was huge, like taller than our house and covered in dark brown fur. But it wasn't a bear. It walked kinda upright on two legs, but all hunched over. The face was the worst part. It looked like a mix of a baboon and a dog, all smashed together with these giant yellow teeth and long, curved claws. It smelled bad too, like rotten meat. We froze. This thing just stared at us for a sec, then let out this blood-curdling roar that shook the ground. We didn't wait around to see what it did next. We booked it out of there so fast our legs were burning. Didn't stop running till we got back to Grandpa's house, and wouldn't let us out of the house for the rest of the night. Anyone else ever seen something like that? My grandpa wouldn't say. This thing, it was more than just big. At first, all I could see was the dark shape of it, like a bear standing up, but when Frankie tripped and screamed his lungs out, that's when it sort of shifted, like it was hunched over on all fours, and then it just straightened up. But not like a human, all smooth and natural. It was jerky and wrong, like its bones were bending the wrong way. Then the flashlights caught its face, and I swear, my heart just stopped for a second. It wasn't a bear snout or even a wolf. It was like a baboon's face, kind of flattened out and long, with a wrinkled, hairless nose. But the teeth, those were something else. Long and yellow, sticking out in this jagged line and way too big for its mouth. The worst part, though, was the hands, not paws, hands. They were long and bony, with nails that looked more like claws than some wild animals. The way they twitched and curled made me think of a spider, something big and hungry that was about to grab its prey. My mind froze. I couldn't even think. All I knew was that this wasn't right. It wasn't even like being scared of a bear or a mountain lion. That was a fear I understood. This was something different, something my brain couldn't even make sense of. I could feel Frankie shaking next to me, hear him whimpering. That's what snapped me out of it. Every bit of me screamed to run. My legs felt like jelly, like they wouldn't even move if I tried. But I forced myself to take one step back, then another. That smell, I think that's what made me really lose it. It was rotten meat, old blood, and something else I couldn't put a name to. My stomach heaved. I swear I thought I was going to be sick right then and there. Then, that thing roared. It was more than just loud. It felt like it shook the air around us. The whole canyon echoed with it. Frankie screamed and we both took off. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it had burst through my chest. I could hear the thing crashing through the trees, but I didn't dare look back. Me and Frankie, we were all about proving ourselves tough. Heck, that's how we ended up at Skinwalker Canyon in the first place. A stupid dare. Even walking out there at night with just a couple dinky flashlights, I wasn't too scared. This canyon was part of the land I'd known my whole life. Sure, the stories about missing cattle gave the place a spooky vibe, but that felt more like campfire fun than real danger. The canyon itself was narrow, the moonlight barely reaching the bottom. Big, twisted juniper trees scraped the sky like gnarled fingers. It was dark in there, and the shadows played tricks on your eyes. That's what I kept telling myself at first, when I heard the rustling and crunching of leaves. Just some animal, a rabbit maybe, scared off by our flashlights. Then came the smell. That thick, rotten thing that made my stomach heave. It seeped through everything, even the fear pounding in my head. That's the thing about Skinwalker Canyon. It's more than just rocks and trees. It's a place where the stories feel heavy. The old warnings about things you can't explain start nagging at the back of your mind. The second I saw that hulking shape emerge from the darkness, all that changed. Fear wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was the canyon itself, alive and breathing down my neck. My grandpa, he's always been careful about these things. He's got stories about his own grandpa running into skinwalkers back when they used to travel with the sheep, back when things were different than they are now. Stories about how they can trick you, turn into animals, or people you know, even family members. The smell is the worst, he says. That sickly, sweet, rotten scent that means they're close by, maybe even watching you. After that night in the canyon, I think I understand a little better what he meant, because even though I didn't see that creature change shape, it didn't have to. It was wrong in its bones. A twisted mix of animal and something else I don't want to think about too hard. Makes you wonder how many times you've walked past something like that, hidden just out of sight, disguised as an ordinary deer or a coyote. Sometimes, after we got home from the trip, I'd lie awake at night and listen to the crickets outside. I'd wonder if there were other sounds mixed with the chirping, something low and rasping, inhuman noises that I was too terrified to hear clearly. I'd think about what Grandpa said, how the old stories aren't just stories. Maybe they're warnings, passed down through all those years for a reason. Maybe some things just can't be explained away, no matter how much you want to believe the world's a simpler place. It happened last summer when my family went on a camping trip near Reno. We were staying at this really pretty campground with lots of trees and a little river nearby. Anyway, one night I had to go to the bathroom, but I didn't want to wake up my parents. So I put on my hoodie and my flip-flops and snuck out of the tent. The bathroom was kind of far away, so I had to walk through this big open field. I was just minding my own business, looking up at all the stars, when all of a sudden, I saw something super weird. At first, I thought it was just a firefly, but then I realized it was way too big and bright to be a bug. It was this glowing ball of light, kind of like a mini sun or something, and it was floating right in front of me, just hovering there in the middle of the field. I rubbed my eyes to make sure I wasn't seeing things, but nope, it was still there. Then, things got even weirder. The ball of light started moving, like it was alive or something. It zigged and zagged through the air, leaving this trail of sparkles behind it. And I swear I could hear this faint buzzing sound, like when you walk under a power line. I was so freaked out that I couldn't even move. I just stood there like a deer in the headlights, watching this thing dance around. Part of me wanted to run away screaming, but another part of me was kind of amazed. I mean, how often do you see a flying, glowing ball in real life? But then, the light started coming towards me, and that's when I really started to panic. I could feel this tingly, electric feeling on my skin, like when you rub a balloon on your hair. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and I thought for sure I was going to pee my pants. Right when I thought the light was going to touch me, it suddenly shot up into the sky and disappeared. Poof! Just like that. I blinked a few times and rubbed my eyes again, but it was really gone. I ran back to the tent as fast as I could and dove into my sleeping bag. I didn't sleep a wink that whole night. I just kept replaying what I saw over and over in my head, trying to make sense of it. The next day, I told my parents what happened, but they just laughed and said I must have been dreaming. But I know what I saw, and I know it was real. I tried to look it up online when we got home to see if anyone else had ever seen something like that. I found all these websites about alien spaceships and ghost orbs and stuff like that, but none of them quite matched what I saw. So I guess I'll never really know what that glowing ball was or why it showed up that night. But one thing's for sure, I'm never going camping near Reno again, and I'm definitely never walking through an empty field alone at night. It's been almost a year since it happened, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I even drew a picture of the light thingy in my secret notebook, just so I wouldn't forget what it looked like. Part of me kind of wishes I could see it again, just to prove to myself that it was real and not just some crazy dream. But mostly, I'm just glad it didn't abduct me or zap me with its alien powers or something. So yeah, that's my spooky story. Believe it or don't, but I'm telling you, there's some weird stuff out there. I hope this email finds you well. I've been a big fan of your website for years now, and I've always enjoyed reading about the strange and unexplained experiences that folks have had out in the wilderness. Well, I reckon it's about time I shared one of my own. It was about 5 years ago, and I was out in the Humboldt-Toyabee National Forest in Nevada, just doing some exploring and enjoying the peace and quiet. I had my old reliable pickup truck with me, and I figured I'd find a nice spot to set up camp for the night. As I was driving along this narrow, winding road through the forest, I started to get a funny feeling, like I was being watched. I chalked it up to just being out in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but trees and critters for company. But then, I rounded a bend and saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing in the middle of the road, was this creature. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, with long, spindly arms and legs. Its skin was a sickly grayish color, and it had these big, bulbous eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. I slammed on the brakes, but it didn't move, just stood there staring at me. I don't mind telling you, I was scared out of my wits. I reached for my flashlight, but when I looked back, the thing was gone. Vanished into thin air, like it had never been there at all. I didn't stick around to investigate. I hightailed it out of there as fast as I could, and I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town. I've been back to that forest a few times since then, but I've never seen anything like that creature again. But here's the thing. A few months after my sighting, I was talking to some people in a bar not too far. They started telling me stories about strange things that had been happening in those woods for years. People going missing, bizarre animal mutilations, and even a few sightings of creatures that matched the description of what I saw that night. One old-timer even told me that the native folks in the area have legends about a race of beings that live deep underground, coming up to the surface only rarely to hunt and gather. He said they were called the Tsiatko, or Skywalkers, and that they had the power to cloud men's minds and lure them away into the darkness. I'm not saying that what I saw was one of these Tiatko, but I can't help but wonder if maybe there's some truth to those old legends. If maybe there are things out there in the woods that we don't understand, things that have been around a lot longer than we have. If you're ever out in this neck of the woods, give me a holler. I'll buy you a beer and tell you some more of my tales. So, this happened a couple years ago when I was visiting my cousins in Nevada. They live way out in the boonies, like literally in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town is probably an hour's drive away, and their closest neighbor is miles down the road. It's the kind of place where you can really get away from it all, you know? So one night, we decided to have a bonfire in their backyard. They have this huge property with lots of land, so we figured it would be the perfect spot to hang out and roast some marshmallows. We set up the fire pit, grabbed some snacks and blankets, and settled in for a chill evening under the stars. Everything was going great at first. We were telling jokes, swapping stories, just having a good old time. But then, maybe around midnight or so, things took a turn for the weird. It started with this strange feeling, like we were being watched. You know that prickly sensation on the back of your neck when you just know someone's staring at you? Yeah, it was like that, but times 10. We all kind of fell silent at the same time, looking around uneasily at the dark expanse of desert surrounding us. That's when we heard it. This low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from every direction at once. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. It was deeper, more menacing somehow. And it was close, like just beyond the reach of our firelight. We all jumped to our feet, huddling closer together instinctively. My cousin Jake grabbed a flashlight and started sweeping the beam around, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there. But all we could see was the endless sea of sagebrush and scrub stretching out into the night. The growling intensified, growing louder and more aggressive. It sounded like it was coming from multiple directions now, circling us like we were prey. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. And then, for just a split second, I saw it, illuminated in the flashlight's beam, a pair of glowing amber eyes staring back at us from the darkness. But that wasn't the horrifying part. No, the truly terrifying thing was the creature those eyes belonged to. It was huge, easily over 7 feet tall, with a hulking, muscular body that was covered in dark, matted fur. But it wasn't just a large animal. It was standing upright, on 2 legs, like a person. And its face, God, I'll never forget its face. It was like a wolf's, but distorted and elongated in a way that was deeply unsettling. Its muzzle was full of jagged, gleaming teeth, and its ears were pointed and alert. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sight of that thing, that impossible, nightmarish creature, was just too much. The others started yelling too, and we all made a break for the house, tripping over each other in our haste to get inside. We slammed the door shut and locked it, as if that flimsy piece of wood could somehow keep the monster at bay. We were all shaking, on the verge of tears, desperately trying to process what we'd just seen. The rest of the night passed in a sort of hazy blur of fear and confusion. None of us slept a wink. We just sat in the living room, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house, until the sun finally rose and bathed everything in reassuring daylight. In the stark light of morning, it was tempting to write the whole thing off as some sort of mass hallucination or prank. But deep down, we all knew what we'd seen was real. There was something out there in the desert that night, something that defied explanation or logic. I'm still pretty shaken up about this whole thing, but I feel like I need to share what happened to me. I swear on my life that everything I'm about to tell y'all is 100% true. So, a few weeks ago, my boyfriend Dave and I decided to go camping in the Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest out in Nevada. We both love the outdoors, and getting away from it all, we found this really beautiful, secluded spot to set up camp near a bubbling creek. The first day and night went great. We hiked, made s'mores, cuddled by the fire the whole 9 yards. But then, on the second night, things got weird. It was probably around 2 a.m., and we were sound asleep in our tent. All of a sudden, I woke up to this god-awful screeching sound coming from outside. It sounded sort of like a woman screaming bloody murder mixed with a rabid coyote or something. I don't even know how to describe it. I sat bolt upright, my heart pounding out of my chest. I shook Dave awake, and we just sat there holding each other, scared out of our minds. The screaming and yowling seemed to be coming from all directions, circling our tent. I swear it sounded like some sort of deranged animal was mere feet away. This went on for probably 10 minutes that felt like an eternity. I was trembling and crying. Dave was as white as a sheet. We didn't dare make a sound. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the screaming stopped, and everything went dead silent, like unnaturally silent. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. We waited for probably an hour before nervously poking our heads out of the tent, clutching our flashlight with shaking hands. As we swung the beam of light around, my blood ran cold. There, at the edge of our campsite, was a trail of very large, very disturbing footprints. They looked humanoid, but warped and elongated with long, sharp toes or claws. The prints seemed to emerge from the forest, circle our tent a few times, then disappear back into the darkness of the woods. I lost it at that point. I broke down sobbing and begging Dave for us to get the hell out of there. He didn't hesitate. We hastily threw our stuff in the car and sped away at probably 4 a.m, not stopping until we put 100 miles between us and that godforsaken forest. I still have nightmares about those hellish screams. I can still see those twisted footprints when I close my eyes. My boyfriend and I are experienced campers and have spent countless nights in the wilderness, but we've never experienced anything like that in our lives. I'm telling you, there was something out there in those woods that night, something unnatural stalking us. I know in my bones it was a skinwalker. Needless to say, I don't think we'll ever go camping in Nevada again. Or maybe even camping at all. I don't know. I just can't shake the feeling that whatever that thing was, it's still out there somewhere. Watching. Waiting. So yeah, that's my Skinwalker story. Believe me or don't, I don't really care. I just had to get it off my chest. Let me know if any of you have ever experienced anything like this. I can't be the only one, right? Stay safe out there. My family were camping near the Arizona border. We go there every summer because my mom is Navajo and she likes to visit the reservation where she grew up. Anyway, one evening I was walking back from the bathrooms all by myself. I know, I'm not supposed to go anywhere alone, but I really had to pee and my big brother was being annoying, so I snuck off while my parents were making dinner. I was almost back to our campsite when I heard this weird noise coming from the woods. It sounded kind of like a mix between a grunt and a growl, like nothing I'd ever heard before. At first I thought maybe it was a bear or something, but then I remembered there aren't any bears in that part of Nevada. So I stopped and listened harder, trying to figure out what it could be. And that's when I saw it. There, standing half hidden behind a big pine tree, was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my whole entire life. It was really tall and hairy, like a Bigfoot or something. But its face, oh man, its face was the worst part. It looked kind of like a baboon, with a long snout and these huge, sharp teeth that stuck out. And its hands, they weren't normal hands. They had these super long claws, like Freddy Krueger or Wolverine. I was so scared that I couldn't even scream. I just stood there, frozen, staring at this monster that was staring right back at me. Its eyes were kind of yellowish, and they looked really mean, like it wanted to eat me or something. I don't know how long we stayed like that, just looking at each other. It felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. Then, the creature let out this terrifying roar, and I finally unfroze. I ran faster than I've ever run before. All the way back to our camp, I was crying and shaking, and I could barely talk. My parents thought maybe I'd seen a coyote or a mountain lion and got scared. They tried to calm me down, but I kept insisting that it wasn't any normal animal. I told them about the baboon-faced and the claws and how it stood up on two legs like a person. My dad looked kind of worried, but my mom got really serious all of a sudden. She asked me to describe exactly where I saw it and what it looked like. When I was done, she nodded and said something in Navajo that I didn't understand. Later, she told me that our people have stories about creatures like the one I saw. They're supposed to be these ancient spirits that guard the land, and sometimes they show themselves to humans as a warning or a sign. I don't know if I believe in all that spirit stuff, but I definitely believe what I saw was real. I even drew a picture of it in my journal so I wouldn't forget. I still have nightmares about those yellow eyes and those horrible claws sometimes. I tried to look up what it could be on the internet, but I couldn't find anything that matched exactly. The closest thing was Bigfoot, but all the pictures of Bigfoot just look like big, hairy guys. They don't have baboon faces or knife fingers. So I guess maybe my mom is right, and it was some kind of Navajo monster. All I know is that I'm never going camping in those woods again, no matter what. And if I ever see anything like that again, I'm running first and asking questions later. I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. I mean, can you imagine coming face to face with something like that, all alone in the middle of the forest? It's the stuff of nightmares, for real, but I'm glad I told my family, and I'm glad my mom believed me. It makes me feel a little less crazy, you know? Like maybe I'm not the only one who's seen something they can't explain. So that's my story. It's okay if you don't believe me, but I swear on my Navajo ancestors that every word is true. There are some weird, scary things out there in the world, and I think I met one of them that summer. And I really, really hope I never meet another one again. Okay, I've been debating whether or not to post this for weeks now, but after a lot of soul searching, I feel like I need to share my story. This happened about a month ago, and I'm still processing everything, so please bear with me. And I just want to say up front that I'm not looking for attention or anything like that. I'm just a regular person who had a really, really bizarre experience that I can't explain. I grew up in a small town in Mississippi that has a long history of strange occurrences. UFO sightings, ghostly activity, cryptid creatures, you name it. My parents used to tell me stories about the weird things they experienced growing up there. I always had an open mind about that sort of stuff, but I never really thought I'd have my own encounter one day. Fast forward to my early 20s. I moved to Las Vegas for college and ended up staying there after graduation. I love the city, the energy, the people, the endless things to do. But sometimes the non-stop stimulation gets to be a bit much, you know? So when my friend Maggie suggested we take a weekend camping trip to Stargaze and get some fresh air, I jumped at the chance. Maggie and I have been best friends since freshman year. We bonded over our shared love of photography and the great outdoors. We've gone on a bunch of adventures together over the years, from hiking in the Grand Canyon to whitewater rafting in Colorado. But this trip was supposed to be a relaxing one. Just two friends enjoying nature and each other's company. So here's what happened. My best friend Maggie and I decided to take a little weekend getaway to go hiking and stargazing out near the Nevada-California border. We're both into photography, especially astrophotography, and we wanted to take advantage of the dark skies out there. We set out on a Friday afternoon and made it to our campsite in the early evening. The first night was incredible. We got some amazing shots of the Milky Way and even saw a few shooting stars. We stayed up late just marveling at the vastness of the universe and how small we felt in comparison. It was a really special night. But the second night is when things took a turn for the weird. It was probably around 1 a.m., and Maggie and I were taking some long exposure shots of the stars. We had walked a little ways away from our campsite to get away from the glow of our fire. As we were standing there in the darkness, I suddenly got this really uneasy feeling, like we were being watched. I turned to say something to Maggie, and that's when I saw it. Standing maybe 50 feet away from us, half obscured behind a large boulder, was a tall, slim figure. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was something very wrong about its proportions. Its arms and legs were far too long and spindly, and it had an oversized, almost bulbous head. I couldn't make out any facial features, but I could feel it staring at us. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. I grabbed Maggie's arm, unable to tear my eyes away from the creature. She turned to look, her hand flying to her mouth. We stood there paralyzed for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few seconds. Then, the thing started moving towards us with an unnatural, gliding gait. That jolted us out of our paralysis real quick. We both screamed and took off running back towards our campsite, crashing through the underbrush in complete panic. I've never run so fast in my life. We made it back in record time, hurriedly threw our stuff in the car, and sped off into the night without looking back. Maggie and I didn't say a word to each other the whole drive home. I think we were both in shock. The next day, after getting some much-needed sleep, we met up to talk about it. We compared what we both saw to make sure we weren't crazy. The disturbing thing is, our accounts matched perfectly. There was no doubt that we'd both seen the same thing out there. I still don't know what to make of it. I've racked my brain trying to come up with a rational explanation, but I keep coming up empty. I mean, what has arms and legs that long? What has a head shaped like that? What moves in such an odd way? The only thing I can think is that it was some sort of humanoid entity, an alien, maybe. I don't know. What I do know is that I'll never forget that night for as long as I live. The image of that lanky, disproportionate figure emerging from the darkness is permanently seared into my mind. Maggie and I still talk about it sometimes in hushed tones, but we've never told anyone else. I mean, who would believe us anyway? I'm sharing this now because I can't keep it bottled up anymore. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there has seen something similar and can help shed some light on what we experienced. I don't know if I believe in aliens or interdimensional beings or anything like that, but I do know that there are things in this world that defy explanation. And I know that Maggie and I encountered one of those things out in the desert that night. Alright, this is where things get really dark. I haven't told many people about this part because it's just so disturbing and personal. But if I'm going to tell my story, I might as well tell the whole truth. After that night in the desert, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had attached itself to me. Like that spindly alien creature had somehow latched onto my energy or my aura, or whatever you want to call it. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. It started with the dreams. Night after night, I'd find myself back in that desert, paralyzed with fear as that creature loomed over me. Sometimes it would just stand there, staring with those haunting, featureless eyes. Other times it would reach out with those long, bony fingers, and I don't want to get into the specifics. Let's just say I'd wake up screaming. But it wasn't just the dreams. I started seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, even in broad daylight. Glimpses of a tall, distorted figure lurking just out of sight. I'd whip around to look, but it would always vanish. It got to the point where I was afraid to be alone, constantly looking over my shoulder. And then there were the physical sensations. The feeling of icy fingers trailing down my spine. The prickling on the back of my neck, like something was breathing down on me. I even started waking up with bruises and scratches I couldn't explain. I thought I was losing my mind. I confided in Maggie, but she just looked at me with a mix of concern and skepticism. She suggested I talk to a therapist and maybe try some sleeping pills for the nightmares. But I knew this was more than just some mental breakdown. Things came to a head a few months after our camping trip. I was driving home from work late one night when I got into a horrible car accident. A truck ran a red light and T-boned me at an intersection. My car flipped and everything went black. When I came to, I was in the hospital with a concussion, 2 broken ribs, and a shattered arm. The doctors said it was a miracle I'd survived, but as I lay there in that sterile hospital bed, groggy with pain meds, I saw it. Standing in the corner of my room, half shrouded in shadow, was the creature. That same elongated figure with the bulbous head and spindly limbs. It was watching me with what I can only describe as a kind of grim satisfaction. And I knew with a chilling certainty that it had caused my accident, that it had been trying to kill me. I started screaming my head off until the nurses came running. Of course, by the time they got there, the creature was gone. They sedated me, and when I woke up later, I tried to convince myself it had just been a drug-induced hallucination. But deep down, I know better. That thing, whatever it is still out there. I can feel its malevolent presence even now, hovering on the edges of my consciousness. I don't know what it wants from me or why it's chosen to torment me. All I know is that my life hasn't been the same since that fateful night under the stars. I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for that creature to make its next move. I've tried to do research to find out if anyone else has experienced something similar, but most of what I find is just speculation and conspiracy theories, alien abductions, interdimensional entities, government experiments gone wrong. None of it brings me any closer to understanding what happened to me. So I'm left with the constant, gnawing fear that I'll never be free of this thing, that it will keep haunting me until it finally claims my life for good. It's a heavy burden to bear, but what choice do I have? I'm sharing this now because I'm at my wit's end. I don't know where else to turn. If anyone out there has any insight or advice, please, I'm begging you, help me understand what I'm dealing with. Help me find a way to break free of its grip. Because I don't know how much longer I can go on like this, living every day in the shadow of that nightmarish figure. It's eating away at my sanity, my will to live. I just want my life back. I'm from a small town in Idaho. Lots of forest around where I live. Real thick pine woods. I've been hunting in those woods with my dad since I could carry a rifle, and never had anything weird happen. Until last year, that is. Normally, I hunt deer or elk. That October, buddies were telling me about wild hogs getting bad, ruining crops and such. Said there was good money in hauling a carcass into the collection point. So, figured I'd try it. Bad idea. Packed my gear like always. Rifle, ammo, knife, some jerky, and water. Headed out further into the woods than normal. further towards the old fire lookout tower that nobody uses anymore. I'd heard reports of hogs near there, hiked for hours, saw some signs of digging in the dirt, but no hogs. Sun was starting to set, and I knew I wouldn't be making it home before dark. Then I heard this screeching, not like any animal I'd ever heard. High-pitched and long. It made the hair on my neck stand up. Followed the noise, thinking maybe it was an injured bird or something. Came to this little clearing. Thing is, the trees around it were wrong, twisted and bent, branches broken. The ground was all dug up, and in the middle was this pile of stuff, bones, pieces of fur, all tangled together, and it smelled awful, like rotten meat left out in the sun. Suddenly, the screeching started again right above my head. Looked up, and I saw it. Huge thing, easily 10 feet tall, thin and hunched. Skin was hairless and pale. Its head was way too big for the body, and the eyes, I can't even describe the eyes, huge and black. No white part at all. Froze. Didn't have time to grab my rifle, and I doubt it would have done much anyway. That thing stared at me for a while that felt like forever. Then it turned and moved into the trees, fast for how big it was. Made a snapping sound, like branches breaking. I got out of there. Didn't stop running until I made it back to my truck. Never said anything to anyone. They'd think I was crazy. But I know what I saw. Still think about it sometimes. That pile in the clearing and those eyes looking down at me. Wonder if I was lucky it didn't decide I was dinner. Is there something else out there? Something we don't know about? Well, now I think there might be. It's not just the creature, it's that whole clearing. The way it felt wrong, almost unnatural. Like there was this bad energy hanging in the air, and that pile of bones and fur, it wasn't just random, you know. It was arranged in a way I couldn't make sense of. I ain't the most religious guy, but it gave me a bad feeling, like I'd stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see. Then I started thinking about those stories. You know, the ones you hear about folks finding weird stuff in the woods, animal sacrifices, strange markings carved into trees. Always dismissed them as just tall tales. But after what I saw, makes me wonder if there's something darker out there. Folks who meet up in secret, doing stuff no one should know about. Makes you realize your quiet little town might not be so safe after all. Sometimes I think about going back out there, trying to find that clearing again, just to prove to myself it wasn't all in my head. But then I remember that thing, those black eyes staring down at me. I'm not sure I want to know for certain what's really going on out in those woods. It's not just the clearing. The thing itself wasn't right. I've spent plenty of time outdoors, seen my fair share of animals. But this, it was different. The way it moved, how pale and smooth its skin was. And those eyes, they didn't look like any animal's eyes. They looked knowing, almost intelligent. There's no way it was any kind of critter I've ever seen in these parts. No bear or mountain lion grows that tall or walks on two legs like that. And it wasn't any person either. People don't have eyes that glow in the dark, and we sure as heck can't vanish into the woods that fast. Makes me wonder if I ran into one of those things you hear stories about. Cryptids, Bigfoot, that kind of thing. But the more I think on it, the less sense it makes. This creature didn't seem like some curious wild animal. It seemed, well, almost malevolent, like it enjoyed just watching me be scared. Then, there's the fact that I never found any tracks, even though the ground was soft after a rain, and it never made a sound besides that screeching, not even when it moved through the trees, like it wasn't even a real living thing. I don't know what I believe exactly. Ghosts, demons, aliens, it's all just words. But I do know one thing for sure. There's something else out there. Something we can't explain. And the thought of running into that thing again, it terrifies me more than anything else I can imagine. I haven't gone back into those woods since. Too scared, maybe. Makes me feel like a coward, but I don't care. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear something scratching at my window, or I see a shadow move just out of sight. Don't know if it's just my imagination playing tricks, or if that thing somehow followed me home. The whole thing messed with my head, made me jumpy, suspicious of every little sound. Used to think I knew my place in the world, how things worked. Turns out, I guess I don't know much of anything. We like to think we're in control, that the world around us is safe and predictable. I'm a trucker, long-haul routes mostly. Been through Nevada more times than I can count. It's all desert and mountains, not much out there except the occasional roadside diner or truck stop. Anyway, last month I was on a late-night run. Empty trailer, just trying to make good time. Around 2 a.m., I'm on this stretch of highway. No one else in sight for miles. Spot something dead ahead on the road and slow down, thinking it's a deer or something. Then I get closer, and I realize it's not an animal, it's a person. Only they're not exactly normal looking. This person, or whatever it was tall, real tall, easy 7 feet. Skinny too, like all bones and skin. It was wearing a long coat, but I could see its arms were too long, almost down to its knees. And the head, it looked too small for the body, with giant eyes. Pitch black, no white part at all, just staring straight at me. I slam the brakes. The thing just stands there, doesn't move at all. At this point, I'm freaking out. Throw the truck into reverse, start backing up as fast as I can. I look in my rearview mirror and it's still there, staring at my truck. Finally got some distance between us, turned around, and hauled it out of there. Didn't stop until I was in the next state. Look, I've seen weirdos out on the road before, but this wasn't human. Never seen anything move so smooth, just standing stock still on the highway like that. Tried to tell myself it was my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark, but I keep thinking about those eyes, like they could see right through me, you know? I've driven that same highway a few times since, always on edge, expecting to see that figure standing there again. Don't know what it was, some kind of desert monster or something worse. But I know this. There's things out there you can't explain. Things they don't tell you about in truck driving school. And that thing, well, I pray I never see it again. I've been trucking for about 10 years now. Seen a lot of this country, mostly the boring parts along the interstates. Pays the bills, and there's a certain kind of freedom in it, you know? Just you, the open road, and whatever radio station you can pick up. This particular run, I'd picked up a load in California, headed east. Nothing special about the cargo, just a bunch of crates probably full of stuff nobody needs anyway. The schedule was tight though. Had to make good time or risk missing my delivery window and losing out on the bonus. That's why I was driving through Nevada in the middle of the night. Not ideal, but sometimes you gotta push it. I'd been on the road for the better part of 14 hours, chugging coffee and energy drinks, just trying to stay awake. Maybe that's why my mind started playing tricks on me. Maybe, look, I've seen weirdos out on the road before. Tweakers, hitchhikers, you name it. But this was different. The way it moved, or rather didn't move, wasn't natural. A normal person, even someone out of their mind, would have reacted to a truck backing up at them. This thing just stood there, like it wasn't even real. And those eyes, I've never seen eyes like that on any living creature. Just those huge black pools staring right through me. Makes me think back to those old stories about aliens, or demons, or whatever else people say is out there lurking in the shadows. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe it was just exhaustion and my headlights playing tricks in the darkness. But there's a part of me deep down that knows what I saw was real, that there's things out there that defy explanation, things that aren't supposed to exist. And after that night in Nevada, I'm not so sure I want to meet another one. I was about 16 when it happened. My family had this old cabin up in the mountains, way back in the woods, the kind of place where cell service is a joke. I'd spent summers there my whole life, so I knew the area pretty well. One afternoon, I decided to go exploring, take a trail I hadn't been on before. Stupid, I know, but I figured I'd be back before dark. The trail wound through these super thick pines, the kind where sunlight barely filters down. Then, ahead, it opened into a clearing. Now, this clearing, it wasn't right. The trees stopped in a perfect circle, and the ground was like dirt on pavement, hard-packed and totally bare. No grass, no rocks, nothing. I should have turned back right then, but I was curious, and again, dumb teenager. I stepped into the clearing, and that's when I saw it. Standing stock still on the far side was this creature. Tall, at least 7 feet, hunched over with skinny arms way too long for its body. The skin was pale, almost gray, and its head, it was bald, with these huge black eyes that just stared straight at me. I froze. Wasn't scared exactly. More like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The thing didn't move, didn't make a sound, just kept staring. After what felt like forever, I blinked and it was gone. Just vanished. I hauled it back to the cabin, didn't even look behind me the whole way. Told my parents I got lost on the trail, figured they'd think I was an idiot. Never went back to that clearing, and I still don't know what I saw that day. Some weird animal I never heard of? Something else? All I know is it wasn't natural, and I never want to see it again. Thing is, that wasn't the only weird thing that happened up at that cabin. My dad, he swore he saw lights in the sky one night, moving in ways that weren't like airplanes or anything. Said they zipped around, then disappeared without a trace. Mom always laughed it off, said he'd been into the moonshine, but part of me wondered. Then there was my grandma. She was the one who told me stories about the old ways, things people used to see in the woods before everything got so crowded. Said there were creatures out there, watching us from the shadows. She never got specific, but I got the feeling she knew stuff she wasn't telling. Even my little brother, he used to say he'd hear noises in the attic at night, scratching, scuttling. Kind of sounds you don't want to think about too hard. We always figured it was just squirrels or something, but sometimes, after I saw that thing in the clearing, I wasn't so sure anymore. My grandpa, though, he was a whole different story. Hunter, woodsman, lived off the land most of his life. He wasn't the type to spook easy, but there was one thing he'd only talk about if he'd had a few drinks in him. Said it happened when he was a young man, hunting up in the high country. Tracked a deer for a whole day, finally caught up to it just as the sun was setting. But something was off. The deer wasn't right. Skittish, like it was being chased by something. Then he saw it. Standing on the ridge, clear as day, was this huge creature. Walked on 2 legs like a man, but was covered in fur. Had a snout like a dog, and eyes that glowed yellow in the dusk. Grandpa said he and that thing just stared at each other for a long minute. Then, it turned and vanished into the trees. Grandpa never shot that deer. Swore he never went back up to that part of the mountains alone again. He always called it a wild man, but looking back, it sounds a lot like those stories you hear about Dogman, or whatever they're called. Makes you wonder if maybe some of the old stories are true, after all. Here's the thing. Even before the stuff in the woods, there was something else I remember. Must have been about 5 or 6 years old. Woke up in the middle of the night, and there were these figures standing at the foot of my bed. tall with scaly skin and big, dark eyes. Now, most folks would say it was a dream or my imagination playing tricks, but I remember it so clearly. The way they looked, the way the air felt in the room, it was real. They didn't do anything, didn't say anything, just stood there watching. Then I blinked and they were gone. Never saw them again, at least not that I remember. But sometimes I think about them. Those eyes, the feeling of being watched, makes me wonder if maybe they were checking up on me, or if it was some kind of test. I know it sounds crazy, talking about aliens and creatures in the woods, but out there, in the places where people rarely go, I think there's more going on than we understand. Maybe one day I'll find some answers. Or maybe it's better to just let some things be a mystery. Like I said, that's all I'm comfortable sharing for now. Family's got its stories, and I've got mine. Doesn't necessarily mean everything we saw was what it seemed, or that there's some big connection between it all. But those experiences, they stick with you, make you wonder what's lurking just out of sight, in the shadows of the mountains and the vastness of the sky. Maybe it's just wild animals and overactive imaginations. Or maybe there's something else out there, something we can't explain. Either way, it's enough to make you keep your eyes peeled and your questions quiet, at least for now. And that's going to sum up today's batch of stories. If you guys enjoyed this episode, be sure to go ahead and comment down below, Nevada is evil. So that way I know who made it to the end of the episode and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy stories like this, where we just talk about strange, supernatural, and paranormal accounts from all across the country and in national forests and national parks, just that sort of thing, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. What are you waiting for? And I'm going to have a bunch of great content coming your guys' way very, very soon. With that said, I'll see you guys in tomorrow's episode.